My name is Eric Stark. I'm a sports performance intern coach here at Marquette University for the summer semester of 2016. And today I will be talking about Canoe Slalom programming. First off, does anyone know what Canoe Slalom is, or have they ever heard about it?
No. Yeah.
Downhill river race
Yeah, it's a whitewater rafting.
in the Olympics.
Right.
Yeah.
So some key characteristics are on this slide. I want to highlight a couple things. That it's a mixture of upstream and downstream gates. So you don't go through all the gates downstream. If the gate is green, you have to go through it downstream. If the gate is highlighted in red, you have to go through it upstream. Another important thing to note is that the course usually lasts anywhere between 90 and 110 seconds. And there are 5 events within Canoe Slalom. So the first event is the singles for kayak for men, singles kayak for women, single canoe for men, single canoe for women, and then there's a double person canoe event for the men. So a little history. When did it start? There's 4 numbers here. Just throw out a guess. One of them is the correct number.
47.
78.
66.
66.
40.
32.
32.
Whatever.
1932. Here are 4 countries.
Germany.
Where did it start?
Russia.
Switzerland.
Switzerland. So 1932 in
It's
Switzerland.
always
Brings us to our needs analysis portion. So here are some common movements associated with canoe slalom, such as protraction and retraction. So based on these movements, we can then identify what muscles are going to be recruited, such as the lats, rhomboids, rear delts. So once we know what muscles are being recruited, that's when we do our exercise selection. I chose to use these 4 core exercises throughout the entire year for programming. Bench press, and then either a military press or a push press, a deadlift, and a squat. If you're asking me why I chose deadlift and squat for a primarily upper body sport, I'll get to that later in the presentation. Power exercises I chose were as follows, noting that the clean complex was only used a couple times, whereas the majority of my power exercises were made out of kettlebell swings and med ball work. The assistance exercises had a lot of body weight exercises as well as rear shoulder. Main thing here is I wanted to train my athlete like a gymnast. I wanted to make sure that he had a really strong core and he was really comfortable with using his body, in a lot of different planes of motion, such as sagittal, frontal, and transverse, which are all found in canoe slalom. Really important parts of my programming are the structural exercises. So canoe slalom uses the core very intensely. So I wanted to make sure I had a lot of rotations, anti-rotations, as well as a lot of core exercises, holds, time under tension, so sitting planks, ring dips, L-sits, those types of things. So the sport-specific exercises were used primarily in the preseason. So I wanted to make sure that I'm doing an exercise in which he's going to be most likely, when he's performing or when he's competing, I wanted to make sure it was most likely closely simulated to that. So he's going to be in seated positions such as the L-sit, bend over rows, things like that, where he's going to be engaging his core in a seated position. So like I mentioned before, canoe slalom lasts anywhere from 90 to 110 seconds, which is going to be using the fast glycolytic system. So we're going to be training the anaerobic system as well as a little bit of aerobic with that as well. So my athlete is competing in the kayak 1 for men. He just won gold a couple days ago, and he has no serious injuries. And he's accustomed to high intensity training. So kind of summing it up and figuring out my training goals, I want to make sure that I'm improving his anaerobic work capacity, his core strength, a lot of rotation, lots of core exercises, as well as training power and speed. I also want to make sure that he can perform under tension, so when he's tired towards the end of the race, he can still make those cuts and those motions even when he has a little bit of fatigue. My training frequency is going to slowly start to ramp up, reach its max in the off season, and then decline towards the Exercise order follows a tier type of training system, so we're going to have our power and speed movements in the beginning, followed by core movements such as like our bench press and squats, and then finishing with the accessory assistance exercises. Lots of rear shoulder work, lots of pulls, lots of ab exercises, and that's going to make up the majority of our volume. Injury analysis. So here are some common sites for injury. This slide is going to structure my warm-ups in post-exercise setup to make sure that I'm combating what's most likely to be injured. For example, the shoulder and the rotator cuff, I want to make sure I'm doing lots of banded work during my mobility sessions, as well as a lot of rear shoulder work during my workouts. The overuse injuries. So overuse injuries are really common in canoe slalom. So how I'm going to combat that is I'm going to try to promote muscular imbalance. So muscular balance upper body, so not doing more pushes than I'm doing pulls, make sure I have a 2-to-1 ratio, as well as utilizing my lower body, making sure that the muscles aren't wired a certain way. I want to make sure that he's squatting as well as deadlifting. Now front squats, which we'll be doing, are really good for the core, which is a great exercise for canoe slalom anyways, but it's also going to strengthen the glutes and the AB and AD ductors as well. RDLs and deadlifts are going to strengthen the spinal erectors as well as the hamstrings. So here are a couple sample warm-ups that I'll be doing before we exercise. Here kind of harping on the scapula as well as the thoracic spine and hips. Again, a couple sample warm-ups here. Post-exercise is going to be determined depending on how my athlete's feeling. So we're going to foam roll and static stretch, do mobility exercises, see what's sore, see what's not, go from there. So here is my yearly training plan. So here's the training phase on the top. I know it's a lot of information, but I'm going to highlight a couple sections. So we have the training phase on top. We have our subcategories on the left. So first thing I want to point out is the air bike work capacity as well as the rowing work capacity. So this is the amount of minutes accumulated each week next to the intensity of what those minutes are being performed. So you can see in the postseason, the first week of the postseason, we're starting out with very low volume, just 2 minutes on the air bike, 2 minutes on the rowing machine, low volume, and then we're going to progress to 14 minutes each, still low volume towards the end of the off-season. Here's our intensities right here. You can see that they're undulating. That's due to the strength phases that I'm going to be performing. Usually there's a lot of deload weeks in there, as you can see. There's a 60%, 60%. So active rest deload weeks just to ensure we're not overtraining, as well as the strength tonnage and RPE load down here. I put these into my program because I wanted a way to manage my athlete so I'm not over pushing him, and I want to see how he's feeling at that time. So the RPE player load, I just took the RPE, how we felt that day, times by the minutes at which, how many minutes we trained, and got a number just to see how he's feeling. The time under tension, as well as the sets, show the progression starting low and working our way up through the off season. We can see here we started at 180 for time under tension as well as 26 sets. And we end around 360 seconds accumulated for that week for time under tension as well as 152 sets. Big picture here, I just wanted to show that we're starting with low volume, moderate load intensity, and we're going to start ramping that up as we move through our off season. The second half of the year, the exact opposite happens. So we have all the same subcategories here. Air bike and rowing work capacity is going to slightly increase and then it's going to decrease all the way until our taper and in season, but the intensity is going to change. So instead of low intensity, it's going to start creeping up to the high intensity. With that, I also want to mention during the first half of the year, the work to rest ratio is going to be anywhere from 5-to-1 or 4-to-1. As we kind of narrow down to the in season, that work rest ratio is going to decrease 3-to-1, 2-to-1. Here, the strength tonnage, player load, time retention, and sets are all really high because we're just getting off our off season, and they're going to start to decrease towards our in season. The intensity stays the same, or it gets higher, but the volume decreases. So big picture. During my transition phases, I wanted to focus on isometric exercises, paired with simple movements. This reason being, I just wanted to have an active recovery type of workout. I wanted the athletes to have a lot of blood rush into their muscles to promote recovery. Off season, focus on max strength, a lot of volume, a lot of hypertrophy. In comparison, in the in season, we did more sport-specific exercises, focused a lot on speed and power instead of max strength, and decreased the volume, but kept the intensity high. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I do have some sample programs for each of the phases that I talked about, starting from the transition phase to the GPP, going through the off-season, and entering the preseason. So this gives a little more in-depth look into what exercises, what sets and reps and percentages I'll be using, as well as how I pair those exercises up. So these sample exercises go all the way through the end season here, and I'll be posting this presentation to my Twitter account, so if you want more information, you can look at that. Yeah, so in conclusion, I just wanted to keep everything very simple. I wanted to make sure that I'm sticking to the core exercises, but switching up the assistance accessory exercises every couple weeks just to improve exercise adherence and keep my athlete engaged. My first goal was to promote injury prevention. He's already an Olympic athlete, so I wanted to make sure that I'm not doing anything to hurt him, but also wanted to make him as efficient and as strong as possible in his event. Here's my contact information. Like I mentioned before, I'll be posting this to my Twitter. You can follow me at eStarkStrength or email me at estarkstrength@gmail.com. Any questions?
So, good question here. Thank you, Eric. My name is Emily Jacobson, Assistant Director of Sports Performance here at Marquette University. You just mentioned there right at the end, your main goal was to prevent injuries throughout your program. Is it possible to prevent injuries?
Not 100%, but that was my main goal with the program. I wanted to make sure that with everything within my control, I wanted to make sure that we're not putting him in positions where he's going to get injured. Again, the sport, him performing the sport is the number one priority.
So maybe not necessarily preventing them, but potentially working to reduce the risk of them.
Correct.
My name is Joey Davey, volunteer strength conditioning coach at Xavier University. Talked about sort of mitigating injuries. What are some of those common injuries that we see in canoe slalom?
So, as my injury analysis slide before, there's a lot of rear shoulder injuries, subluxation, things of that nature. So I just want to make sure I'm strengthening those. We had a lot of face pulls, band pull aparts, things where I'm just working on the rear shoulder as well as the back. Yeah, and then another big thing was overuse injuries. So people using one side more than the other side when they're canoeing or kayaking. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm promoting balance throughout the body so their bodies is equally strong as possible when they get into kayak or canoe.
Hi, Kathleen Anderson. I'm a fellow sports performance intern coach here. Do you have any testing protocols that you're planning to conduct throughout your program?
So I had a max strength just to see where strength levels were at the beginning of the program to base all my numbers and percentages off as well. And I did an FMS screening to see where he was tight and where he wasn't. That was also a big part in structuring my mobility sessions to see he had a lot of thoracic tightness as well as a little bit of hip tightness as well. Hip flexion.
Hey Eric, Will Eggers, sports performance intern coach here at Marquette University. I had a question about that chart where you kind of analyzed your workload for different things. How did you come up with, I think it was strength tonnage? Is that right? How did you come up with that number?
So that number, I just took the amount of pounds I was lifting for that day. So if I was front squatting 200 pounds, I times that by how many reps I performed that weight at. And I got a number of how many total pounds I was lifting that day. and I just added up those strength number exercises to see, okay, how much load am I putting on him this day? How is he feeling compared to this day, and so on and so on,
Okay.
so on and so forth.
And then, so I noticed you had that as well as bike and row. Were those the other things you
Yep.
measured?
The bike and rowing work capacity.
So that's assuming that then during his regular practices he's biking and rowing. That's just kind of, that's besides his weight room training that you're going to be putting him through, or is that part of?
The rowing and the air bike is part of the weight room training.
Oh, it is.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's towards the end of the workout. It's just to really work on his anaerobic work capacity. So it's a cardio component to the weightlifting.
Okay, cool.
Stu Roche, Assistant Director of Sports Performance at Marquette University. I don't know a lot about canoe and kayak slalom. Are the courses, when they have the downstream and upstream gates, is that the same at every course, or might there be more upstream gates in one course versus another? And kind of how would you as a strength conditioning coach kind of plan for that, or following the competition, modify your program based on how many uphill versus downhill?
Okay. So each course is different. It varies in length. So it can go up to 300 meters in length, anywhere from 20 to 25 gates, and they switch up the gates. So there might be 10 downstream and 15 upstream, and then the next course might be the exact opposite. So there's a level of unpredictability within the sport. Something that a strength coach could do to enhance their athlete for this sport would be to have some type of reaction training or something where the athlete has to think quickly on his feet. I wouldn't program more for upstream than downstream because you really don't know. So it really has to be ready for anything.
Final question for me as well is, I saw you had some soft tissue, you had foam rolling in there as potential. Any reason why you chose to do foam rolling at the end of your lifting period versus at the beginning?
No reason in specific. I just think that when the tissue and the muscle is warm, it's a great time to foam run. So at the very end of the workouts.
Any further questions?